Thanks. It's great to be here, and thank you for having us up. We think at Ratio a great deal of Ball State's program, and we've received the benefit of quite a few graduates coming up and helping us out. And so we think you guys have a great program, and look forward to continuing to employ graduates of it. Also want to say thanks to Malcolm for having me up. Malcolm was a teacher of mine at Illinois in 1986. And one of the better ones, and when he said he was going to leave Illinois to come to Ball State, we all said, Ball State? Where in the world is that? And we're sad to see him go, but now here we are together again, so it's nice to see you again, Malcolm. As the speaker said, or the introducer said, I'm going to present Miller Showers Park, which is a project that our firm has been involved in Bloomington, Indiana. And what you're going to see is a proposal that we gave the city to in response to a request for proposals. So this is not yet a built work. It's unbuilt, and I think for the award submittal we referred to it as a vision plan. We did subsequently get chosen to do the design work, and so we're working on that right now. And towards the end of this little series of slides, I'll show you a few images that we've excuse me, kind of gotten to beyond this. The team that put this document together was led by R.W. Armstrong in Indianapolis, and also included J.F. New. R.W. Armstrong is the civil engineer on the project and also responsible for a lot of the utility design work. J.F. New and Associates is a name that's probably familiar to some of you. They are an environmental engineer here based in Indiana, but they have offices throughout the Midwest, and they are serving on the team as the sort of a native plants expert, permitting expert, and a stream redesign expert. They're kind of fitting in at a lot of different places and creating a nice bridge between Ratio and R.W. Armstrong. Again, I'm with Ratio Architects. We were the lead designer on the park, responsible for the overall aesthetic of it, the final grading plans, and all of the architectural elements. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the context of the project, and then just get into the program, show you some conceptual alternatives that we developed as part of the RFP, and then, as I said, finish up with a few images showing kind of where we are now. Continue, you can go to the next one. This is a map of Bloomington. North is to your right, and see if I can work this laser pointer here without too much difficulty. This is State Road 37 up along the top of the image. This is the 45-46 bypass here, and if you're coming up 37 and you take the College Avenue exit, you'll come in on this road right here. That's College Avenue. So this area right here is really kind of one of the gateways to Bloomington, and our project is located right here. So that's one of the reasons Miller Showers Park is significant to Bloomington. It's about an 11-acre piece of property, and College Avenue splits right there and goes to either side of the park, the west side being College Avenue and the east side being Walnut Street at that point. The park exists within about a 2,000-acre urban watershed, and that's what the yellow up here identifies. And as you can see, it's kind of at the top of the watershed. It's the Cascades Creek watershed. That creek runs right down through here and through Cascades Park, which is this large, probably looks black from back there, but it's a green form on the computer. The stream runs through Cascades Park, and Miller Showers Park is at the head of that watershed. So there's about a direct contribution into the park of something like 150 acres of urban stormwater. So some really nasty stuff, non-point source pollutants and all kinds of things are getting in there and doing a great disservice to Cascades Creek. Why don't you go on to the next one, please. This is sort of a 10,000-foot view. Again, Cascades Park here, Miller Showers Park here. This is College Avenue, north is to the right. A lot of the water that's entering into the park comes into a large box culvert located about right there. And one of the most significant program elements, you can go to the next one, please. Oh, that's not what I thought. Okay. One of the most significant program elements that we were asked to consider was developing a way that this park could be used to detain and store and slow down a large volume of water. Again, this watershed of 150 acres or something like that that comes through the park is sort of rushing through the park, through various inlets and so forth, into a ditch. You're not going to be able to see it very well in this photograph, but a ditch that runs right down the middle of the park here, and then on down to another box culvert at the north end, and into Cascades Creek. And it's causing a lot of scouring and erosion. Those creeks are already in bad shape because farther down in Cascades Park there's a concrete plant and a limestone quarry and some other things that are adding a lot of pollutants to it. So everybody recognized, the community recognized that there was an opportunity to use Miller Showers Park as a way to sort of take the first pass at treating a great deal of stormwater. So let me see what else I want to say about this. This just gives you a sense then of the context of the park. Fairly suburban kind of character for, this is Walnut Street here and College Avenue on the other side, and kind of a loose, unorganized collection of plant material that's just sort of occurred over the years. There's some dedicated trees here and there and that kind of thing. You know, the Kiwanis Club has a playground, and those kinds of things are what have ultimately sort of landed here. The park also included a couple of existing monumental limestone sculptures. This piece over here is called Axis by an artist named Dale Enochs, and the other piece is called Red, Blonde, Black, and Olive, more commonly referred to as the Two Faces sculpture, and that's by an artist named John Paul Dernier. And again, they both exist in the park, and one of the requirements was that we incorporate those sculptures. Initially, they wanted them left in place. We've since kind of gotten beyond that a little bit and have actually proposed that this one be moved, but we had to incorporate those two pieces in the program. So again, the program included detaining and slowing water, cleaning a large volume of water, incorporating these sculptures, providing trail connections to Cascades Park. The city is currently implementing an alternative transportation plan that was done by our office that designates bikeways and so forth throughout the community, and one of the high priority points of that plan was to develop a connection between Miller Showers Park and Cascades Park. So that was another one of the things that we did. Relocate utilities outside of park. There are a lot of sanitary sewers, electrical lines, and so forth crisscrossing the park, and the city recognized that ultimately it would be valuable just to have all of that taken out of the park. Create an appropriate gateway image for Bloomington, and provide a design readily maintained. So what we did was we proposed a series of what we referred to as conceptual alternatives that were really intended just to try and understand the community's desires and see where their values were being placed sort of beyond the very, the rudimentary program elements. You got to get into the sentiment of the community and understand what their more intangible values are. And so we took them through a series of these alternatives that sort of, in our opinion at least, kind of started out slow and maybe expected, and then gradually moved towards a less expected answer that might still meet all the objectives. So we started with one that we've referred to as the picturesque landscape. And, excuse me. Get some water, keep this over here. This was a design that we characterized as the expected answer, and developed a lot of the shape and character of this based on what we were seeing in Cascades Park, which is a WPA era, romantically designed park, pretty typical of the 1930s. Has some beautiful old limestone-clad shelters and so forth in it, but otherwise it's laid out in a fairly picturesque manner, romantic manner. And so we thought, well, what if you just extended that concept up and pulled it into Miller Showers, and that way Miller Showers just becomes almost this appendage to Cascades Creek. We could implement some, design some large bodies of water that would help to settle out some of the water coming in to the park from this, again, a large box culvert located down here. And then through a series of weir structures right here and aquatically planted edges and different ways of aerating the water and through a stream and so forth, we could finally deliver water back down to the box culvert at this end of the park, and it would then flow on to Cascades Creek from there. The thought here was that the perimeter of the park could be kept in sort of a trees and lawn state or aesthetic and almost serve as a picture frame to some more natural things that were going on in the interior of the park. So in addition to these bodies of water and the aquatics and so forth, we proposed that the whole floor of this valley, and again, the bottom of the park is maybe 10 or 12 feet on average below the roadways to either side. But we'd plant the floor of this valley in native plants, so a lot of mesic prairie kinds of things and wet mesic prairie plants. The sculpture, the two faces sculpture exists right here. The axis sculpture is not really visible in this image, but it's down here. Those are the existing locations. So we allowed those to stay and then developed this trail system around the perimeter. Down at this end, an idea that has since kind of stuck was the notion of a pier of some kind that would occur with the box culvert that's delivering a lot of this nasty water into the park. And we saw that as maybe an opportunity to educate people about the quality of the water coming in versus the quality of the water going out. So the pier down there and then this pedestrian bridge is another element that's made it all the way through the design process. And then this feature up here, which we referred to as the north terminus. The image at the bottom is just a depiction of what we felt would happen based upon some hydraulic analysis to the park during a significant storm event, like a 100-year storm event. Basically, we intended to set it up so that this whole area inside of the trail system would flood. And you'd introduce a lot of water to a lot of plant material, but otherwise, this was, in terms of a green infrastructure answer, which was what we wanted to get to in each case, this is pretty light. The water doesn't have a whole lot of contact with plant material, and in these following examples, we wanted to try and improve upon that. The next one we referred to as contemporary open water, and it was really just a derivation of what we had done before, but we asked the community to consider the idea of kind of maybe juxtaposing a very built, rigid edge on one side against a more curvilinear natural edge on the other. And really that's the most significant difference. It just has this little kind of clue that it isn't a park of the 1930s, it's very much of today. It provided more aquatic plant material, which is this dark edge you see sort of undulating against the blue, and again allowed these pieces of sculpture to stay in place. This would remain as sort of a turf lawn area here and down into here. Again, these weir structures here I've mentioned before, there's about a 30-foot grade change from the south end of the park to the north end, and so whenever you're contemplating large bodies of water like this over such a large grade change, these areas are all level, so you end up with some fairly significant walls that we thought could become water features. There were probably 6 or 8 foot drops or something like that in several different areas. And again, the image at the bottom portrays kind of a wet weather character. The next sort of visit in this string of ideas we referred to as the Valley Floor Savanna. And it was one that contemplated the idea of just completely getting rid of open water basins altogether and seeing what the community might think about that. This, from a green infrastructure standpoint, this was probably would have been the most successful at cleansing water, because we would be just, again, dumping large volumes of water down here at this end of the park, and through a series of elements that would be, I don't know, you could call them leaky pipes, I suppose, maybe, or weirs with slots in them. You'd sort of back water up in these areas and force all of this direct contact between water and plant material. So, we felt pretty good that that would be a nice environmental solution, but again, this whole area would be planted in native plants, and so it would have a fairly shaggy appearance, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm sure there would be folks in Bloomington who would not like that at all, and others who might appreciate that aesthetic. The one that we ultimately sort of arrived at as an answer, or at least a preferred concept in our opinion, and ultimately the community decided the same, is what we referred to as the treatment train concept. And really it's just kind of a combination of several of the other ideas, but it's putting the whole green infrastructure process on display. So again, water enters this end of the park below or in conjunction with some sort of observation pier here, flows and settles out in a large basin here, and then flows through a series of aquatically planted areas. So rather than the aquatics just kind of being around the perimeter of these ponds, the water is flowing directly through these aquatic areas, which we sort of ultimately learned after some analysis and conversation with JF New that by the time the water from here got to here, we would have been able to pull out maybe 80% of the really nasty stuff from it. So we could achieve a lot of good by organizing things this way in a real linear fashion. Again, some of the contemporary elements would include sort of a hard edge along this side, more of an undulating edge along this side. We propose that certain areas like right in here be sort of set aside for the display, again, of some other natural or native plant materials. We referred to this as the spike rush parterre. So that sounds like an awfully high-minded thing to do, but it looked good on the plan. And then again, a series of sort of these weirs crossing the park at different places. This is the axis sculpture down here. The pedestrian bridge connecting the two sides of the park is still in place. And then we got to this series of elements here. And we wanted to sort of reference a sewage treatment facility, I guess, for lack of a better word. And these great big round water treatment tanks that you see, to us, offered a little bit of possibility to kind of introduce some things that would provoke some conversation and be visually provocative and just fun elements to play with. And so from this natural system, we propose that a series of flumes, and we call them Corten steel flumes in the proposal, convey water between each of these things, and they get gradually smaller until they dump out into a little natural area here. But those would be filled with, again, aquatic plants and things like that, and filters and so forth that would help to clean the water. So again, by the time the water got down here, what we hoped was that there could be, displays that would, maybe measure different water quality variables here, and then take another measurement here, and then you do a measurement here, and you just demonstrate to the public, how this green infrastructure stuff works. So, and then again, the image on the bottom shows how the park would be completely inundated during a very significant storm event, like a 100-year event. The trail ended up loading kind of to one side here, again, just sort of receiving bikers and pedestrians and so forth down here, and then conveying them down and through some kind of a connection over here on into Cascades Creek. And this idea, I think this was the first one where we went ahead and we suggested that they just take the Two Faces sculpture that's located about right here and move it up to the north terminus and allow that to be kind of the primary gateway element to the park. It's a piece that talks about Bloomington's multicultural sort of landscape, and we thought it was appropriate that it be there. And then we left the axis sculpture in place. And a lot of the views and so forth and the things going on down here had to do with setting up a view and being able to appreciate the axis sculpture here. So this was the one that they preferred, and we had a feeling that they might, so we went ahead and, go to the next one, developed a series of perspectives that started to convey the character of that. Here you see these treatment pods and the Corten steel flumes delivering water between them. You get a sense of how the weirs are beginning to function to change the grade and so forth. Again, we propose that the sort of the valley floor of this area be planted in just native plants that in a big event, when this water is all overflowing out of these things, these plants can start to soak a lot of that stuff up. And then we maintained trees and lawn around the perimeter of this as again, kind of a picture frame to make everybody aware that, it wasn't just left to its own devices. There's a certain rationale behind things here, and we thought that would be a visual clue that would help define that. This is the view from this would be the pier at the south end of the park. You're looking north, and kind of get a sense for the pedestrian bridge here, and then the axis sculpture in the foreground, again, that everything was kind of set up around. This is the west abutment or the east abutment, sorry, of the pedestrian bridge. And we tried to introduce the notion of incorporating some whimsical kinds of features. These happen to be turtle finials on top of the bridge abutment that would just always kind of remind someone that the park is about the health of the environment. So fish showed up in different places. These were turtles and so forth. Limestone abutments would be used as just a reference to the natural material. Obviously, it's so plentiful down there. These elements, I forgot to mention that we also worked with a sculptor in Indianapolis by the name of Matt Berg. Matt has done some of the monumental works that if you've been down to White River State Park recently, you'll see his work. There's a huge metal bear down there on the Washington Street Bridge that's his. And we brought Matt into the process to help us develop some ideas for significant monumental signage. This is north of the area that we were just looking at. So the 45-46 bypass is kind of running right by here. It's right at the intersection. There was room to maybe do something like this. And Bloomington, for whatever reason, has kind of adopted a fish anyway as its icon. There happens to be one that's mounted on a wind mast on top of the courthouse downtown. So again, kind of a playful way of referencing that. But these were glass and metal pieces that we thought could just continue to, in an artistic way, sort of send the environmental quality message. Again, another piece by Matt. We asked him to maybe develop some ideas for a bench of some kind, and maybe it could have to do with a fish, and so he came back with this, which is again sort of a stainless steel frame with cast glass inserts and a stone veneer and some things like that. A couple guys sitting on the fin. So this was the other end of the pedestrian bridge. I mentioned the treatment pods. The thought there was that the way to kind of elevate those above the character and aesthetic of a sewage treatment plant, kind of structure, was to install a glass cap on top of this that could be lighted from below. But they otherwise were, concrete walls that would allow for the storage of maybe, 18 or 24 inches of water all around them. But we thought that could be pretty striking to see these series of glowing rings down in the valley floor of this thing as you're driving by on College and Walnut. And again, you get a sense here for how this Corten steel flume sort of engages the side of that pod and allows water to pass through. So that was all approved, and we got the job, and we continued to do design work on it. And just as of January 22nd, the Parks Board formally approved what we've gotten to here after going through a lot of sort of cost evaluations and aesthetic issues and functional conversations and things like that. But you see that the idea is primarily intact. Again, this is the south end of the park, a little bit larger scale, but this is the axis sculpture, the pier down here, the aquatic plants around the edge of the ponds, and then you begin to get into the aquatic plants here. There is still a wall on this side that helps kind of set up this juxtaposition of kind of formal versus informal on one side. And then against that wall is planted a lot of the native plants that ultimately the community decided they were not comfortable with native plants just sort of filling that valley floor of the park. They really wanted them in particular locations, and it was valuable to have them here because as these ponds overflow, the water will go that way, so the root structures of all these plants will help to stabilize that soil and filter the water. but they wanted limited amounts of that and a little more of this, sort of the open turf lawn areas for just pickup games and things like that. Going to the middle of the park, I think this was a new element. Rather than a large treatment pod here, this body of water became a much more informal kind of piece, but the wall that I referred to earlier comes down and it expresses itself right here and completes itself in kind of a sharp corner. So this is about an 8-foot grade change from this aquatic area down to the pond. So you get little slots through this wall that are spilling water down into this area that will be pouring over those on a regular basis. That drainage ditch down the middle of the park currently just constantly conveys water unless it's very, very dry, like in August. And so coincidentally, the Corps of Engineers took jurisdiction over that ditch, so we're having to go through a lot of permit issues there, but it's kind of funny to us. And then the pedestrian bridge is still intact. The abutments are in place, although they did not want to get so aggressive with the ART program, and so those are less aggressive moves in terms of what they have on them from a material standpoint, but visually they're still going to be pretty provocative. And then one last weir here before all of this water discharges into this stream that JFNU is working to redesign. And then there's one more image here, I think, of the north end of the park, just showing the final sort of solution for this north terminus. Again, the axis sculpture is, the two faces sculpture is here. We will move that, and we ended up having conversations with the sculptors and so forth about making sure they were comfortable with those kinds of things. And we've got some support from them there. One of the other sort of major considerations of this plan and was shown on the others is that currently there's a roundabout right here that's a fairly crazy place to be if you're trying to get from this part of the park over to Cascades Creek. And one of the proposals was that become a one-way system from College from Walnut onto College and this way. College is one way this way, Walnut is one way this way. And that was just done in an effort to minimize the width of this pavement and create a nicer situation for a pedestrian or a family with a stroller or even bicycles even to make their way on across. There's some concern about that right now. We're currently discussing ways of trying to understand how we accommodate truck traffic and still feature the pedestrian. And this is a sketch just as of last week showing some of the issues we're working through. This is the north end of the pier. There's a desire on the part of the community to have a fountain of some kind in that south basin. And we were fairly concerned about introducing another big vertical element down there at the south end of the park because we thought it would compete pretty directly with the axis piece. And so what we're working to do is see whether or not they would be willing to accept some kind of feature that would introduce water to this wall off of which a concrete deck is cantilevered and allow the water to move from the end of this wall and through a flume of some kind with a decorative cap on it, and then just spill off the end of the pier. And in that way, it just becomes part of an existing architectural element. It's not another object in the park. So they're considering that kind of thing right now. But we're sort of in this stage of design with a lot of these decorative elements. We're going to try and maintain Matt Berg to develop a glass cap piece for that. And we've just issued construction documents on a mass excavation, sort of a first phase package, and in April we're going to be completing construction documents on sort of the icing on the cake. So I think that's all I have. Are there questions now or later? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
What I'd like to do today is just briefly talk a little bit about who was involved in this project, some of the players, and then go and talk about the design process, where it started from, and then what it ended up as. This is an award for a built project, so I'm really going to concentrate on a lot of images of the final product and how it was built. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about who the players were in this project as it came together. HNTB, I'm going to have to give a little plug here since I work for them. HNTB is a large national company. We have over 40 offices nationwide. And we employ nationwide over 150 landscape architects and planners, making us really the second largest urban design firm in the country. And within that group of offices, each office has its own practice in landscape architecture and urban design. And this project came out of the Indianapolis office, which I head up that practice. As part of the team for this, we had a team of landscape architects that really led the project all the way through, from the conceptual design right through construction. And as part of that team, we have some Ball State grads. Some of you may know them. Scott Siefker graduated, I think, around 1992. Scott was a project landscape architect on this. Another landscape architect is Doug Decker. I think Doug graduated in about 1980 from Ball State. And Carl Kincaid, the landscape architect, worked on this also. So within that team of designers, we also worked with architects, civil engineers, electrical engineers, surveyors, and really the whole team of all the disciplines came together to produce this project. On the client side, we have a group of about 5 entities that we worked with that really made this happen. And I think you'll find out as you go out and work that for a project, a public works project like this to go, it really takes a client team most of the time. And this team was unusual in that it was very focused and worked together very well. The City of Indianapolis Department of Public Works was the agency that really funded it or funneled the money through it and managed it as it went through construction. The town of Speedway is where the actual project is located. And the Holman Memorial Way Foundation is a nonprofit corporation that has been really leading the charge of getting the community involved and looking at long-term maintenance on the project. And the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has had a role all the way through this in really creating a public-private partnership. The Motor Speedway has a vested interest in this corridor as it really is the gateway to their facility. So the president of the Motor Speedway was really involved in all of our meetings all the way through. And then the state of Indiana ended up providing funding for the first phase. So INDOT, as it's known, was a key player, and I'll show you how that really led the way this thing went into design for the first stage. Next slide. So the project background. This project really started out initially as a tree planting project. A number of people from the town of Speedway felt like the Crawfordsville Road corridor, if any of you have seen that, it's basically your typical suburban corridor. And they had wanted to do something for a long time. So a group of citizens got together and said, well, why don't we plant some trees? And that's a logical first step. And HNTB had been working with them for some time on a number of other projects. And we were brought in to help facilitate this vision of what this corridor could be. So the landscape architects on that group started thinking, well, this could be much more than a tree planting project, especially with the unique players that you have. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the link to international racing, and all of those people that come through this corridor. So there are 2 things here that really came out of some of the early master planning. One is this big traffic circle. If you're familiar with the site, here's the Speedway. That's I think, first turn. This is 16th Street, Crawfordsville Road, and Georgetown Road, as well as Main Street into Speedway. It's a really unusual 5-point intersection. It's always a mess during race day and even during the regular work day. What we proposed is a traffic circle in the early master planning, and we did a traffic study that this traffic circle can be engineered and it can work in terms of creating better flows. That intersection fails on a regular basis. This would allow it to really come up to a much more operable level of service. Also then we looked at some ideas on the interstate. This is the 465 interchange for Crawfordsville Road. And how can we really create something on that that would have signage and would engage people right from the interstate as they come into this gateway corridor. We haven't really gone through INDOT yet too much, but the idea is to find out what can we do in terms of land sculpting and any number of things to really create that as a gateway. So these are part of the early master plan ideas that then went into the next phase of some design development. I want to talk now about some existing conditions and work up now to the built project. Crawfordsville Road, if any of you have been along that, is, as I said, a big suburban strip. This is coming right off the interstate, and really the only thing that lets you know that this was the Holman Memorial Way, which is a designation the city gives it in a way to honor the Holman family, is this little sign right here. It says Holman Memorial Way. So it really doesn't do anything for the character of the roadway. Again, here but we do have a nice median here. We have some wide areas right here that are available in the right-of-way. So we had to identify what's in the public realm and what's in the private realm that we can deal with in this project. And we were primarily concentrating on the public realm or within the road right-of-way. So these start to show some available areas. This starts to show also in this area, and I'll have a graphic that shows the layout of the corridor as it is now, but halfway down there's a little curve that is very, you really wouldn't know it's there until you start to think about the sight lines and how this curve really causes your sight to go and focus on some open areas adjacent to the roadway. So we started to see those things as possible opportunities, and then certainly this is the 16th Street entrance where you have a train bridge right here. It's a rusting old train bridge that really could be a gateway. It's a natural gateway now, and we thought, well, maybe there's ways to look at how we can take some of this pavement here that's striped and maybe reclaim that for plantings. So with that, then we started to think, how can we get design inspiration? It's a very basic kind of suburban corridor. The first thing we did is we went to the Motor Speedway Museum. If you've ever been out to the Speedway, they've got a great museum there. And we poured through their historical archives. They're very careful about archiving the history of the Speedway. And it's a very rich heritage for both the town of Speedway, the city of Indianapolis, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So we started thinking, well, what are some things that could maybe be translated into this design idea? And some things we started to see. This is one of the historic scoreboards, and it's somewhat hard to see, but there's a lot of exposed structure, wood trusses and things. And in here, this is the current flagging tower right along the main straightaway. And again, it's all exposed structure. And even these, when you look at the backs of all of these, the seating, it's really beautiful, and it has a lot of exposed metal, really interesting shadows. And then the history, obviously, is a big part of what we were trying to think of what we could do in this corridor to create a real gateway. And then also the color and pageantry as part of the winner's circle. And the people of Speedway are very proud of that, as well as the Speedway itself. And then the old pagoda. If any of you have seen old pictures of the Speedway, there is this old structure. It's like a Japanese pagoda that was right at the finish line. And it's not unlike other structures you see around Indiana in the Midwest along old horse racing tracks. It's kind of turn-of-the-century park architecture. But if you see the current structure that's out there now where they rebuilt it, it is somewhat of an interpretation of this old pagoda. And then the scoring tower, which has been there forever, and it will likely always be there. But it is a very unusual vertical element, something that could be maybe interpreted. And then obviously the color of the cars themselves, the primary colors, and how to bring that movement and color into this gateway corridor. So we started thinking about all those things and thought, well, along this limited right-of-way, what can we do to really make something interesting? And we thought we had to go vertical to some extent. We had to do things that are over scale, because people are driving down this corridor going 45 or 50 miles an hour, and they have to be able to take it all in while they're going fast. This isn't a pedestrian corridor. It's very much a vehicular corridor, and to really make it a pedestrian corridor is somewhat unrealistic at this time. So this is geared to the speed of someone in a car. We looked at the idea of an open latticework structure of some type that then could hold something on it. This being maybe some kind of a permanent flag, the checkerboard obviously relating back to the race theme, some kind of identification marker up here for the corridor, some kind of light topping this that may have somewhat of the pagoda theme, and then this adjacent kind of a sister structure that would have seasonal banners that could go through the three races, the Indy 500, the Brickyard, and now the Formula One, and then have a sponsorship panel. right from the beginning, all the players thought that maintenance is going to be a big issue, and it always is on these kind of corridors and these public works projects. So we thought, well, how can we get sponsorship and embrace that idea rather than somewhat fight it? So the idea is create sponsorship opportunities. The Motor Speedway came up with their marketing department and offered to manage that sponsorship program because they have contacts, throughout the racing world and with major manufacturers that would love to put their name on there on a very small, controlled sign face. You see, it's not very big, but that could bring money to this project to allow it to be a high-quality look that the stakeholders wanted. So going on then in the concept to the next slide, this starts to show this is the corridor itself. It's interesting, it's 2.5 miles, which is the exact same length of the racetrack, which was somewhat of a coincidence, but here's the interstate where you get off at Crawfordsville Road. Then here's that alignment shift right here, and then this is where that big traffic circle may go someday. Here's the speedway right here. So you can start to see the red areas are future phases that we're hoping will be built out. The built phase now is primarily the green. We have some right-of-way here, right as you come in, the main gateway. You have this central focal area here where the alignment shifts, some median work all the way through here, and then this is the eastern gateway at the railroad. So that starts to show the framework of those improvements. Then we took it into a very conceptual stage to start to see what these things could look like as it's put together. And this cross-section here is right at the gateway as you come in from the interstate. This would be looking towards the interstate. This is the existing interstate signage. It's there now. And we start to see how can these pylons start to really define, create a vertical element that is a gateway. And then also how would these other, the banners and the landscape really start to work. And you can see the median, well in this area, this is a depressed median. It didn't have a curb on it, so we added curbs and then planted it very heavy. And you'll see as we started thinking about this, the median really has to be a focus on a corridor like this because what's on either side is mostly built out, and it's mostly typical suburban strip development. Some of it's better quality than others. So to focus on the median with a lot of new work as being the unifying element is very important. And then where we have the opportunity to really go on either side and bring landscape into that as well. And this is a plan view showing that triangular area right as you come off the interstate. And then this is the East Gateway. We're looking at really rehabilitating this whole bridge structure, bringing in paint and graphics along that, as well as looking at the whole surface of the bridge. And then a raised median in this area where it's now concrete and reclaiming that for landscape and for the placement of some of the towers to really make that another gateway from the east. Next one. And then this is an enlargement of the focal area right where the alignment shift is. And again, the idea of raising the median is very important. We put that in as it's not quite a Jersey barrier, the kind you see on the highway, but it's more of a barrier wall, about 18 to 20 inches. And what that does is it also provides a function of getting the landscape above the salt spray zone. Because when you look at these corridors, they're really a terrible place to try to grow plants. They're very harsh, they're dry, they have salt spray. It's probably more like a seaside desert than it is a deciduous forest that we have here. But the idea is to try to do the best we can with that median and really make it lush and make it a focus. Then on either side, again, bringing these pylons as close as we can to the road. One thing you have shown here is these red areas were to be special paving. Unfortunately, that was one of the first things to go in our budget, but if we could do more in the median or on the sides, I think that was a good trade-off to make. So then on the median again, we looked at these raised medians and what can you do so they don't just look like concrete walls. We wanted to do some texture on them. And again, unfortunately, that became a budget issue in terms of texture in the walls. So they really became more like glorified raised curbs. But we had thought about that early on. And then the corridor graphics were very important on creating a real sense of local color and flavor and changing out those graphics on these new light poles that we have as well. Now back to the pylons. We started to really, in some way, it was a difficult sell to really understand what these things look like. They're very large, and we had to find some way to show the client that this is something that is really going to work out there. So what we did is we had a model builder build this, a model to scale, to really show how this would work, as well as the color. The color of these things, if you're going to put 20 or more of these things out there, the color is really important. And so we did a number of different color studies and trying to think about how it's going to look against a blue sky, against a green background of trees. And we finally came up with the red as being probably the most suitable color against a blue sky. And I think that was an appropriate choice. Then we went into the design drawings, and the interesting thing is this: we had to go through the state process for the Indiana Department of Transportation. And you'll see if any of you are ever involved in a state bid letting, they're very specific about how their drawings go and about how they control the process. So that really, it really controlled on how we put our drawings together and even how we specified a lot of what was to happen here. But going through that process, it was amazing. We did it. Usually to get a project from design to construction going through the state can take as much as 3 years. It's a very long process, and we ended up doing this for under a year, about 11 months. We went from design to the ribbon cutting, which was really unprecedented at the state, and the only way that happened is the mayor of Indianapolis had ongoing conversations with the commissioner at INDOT, and the political process really made it happen. So this is an example of really politics making a project work. Next slide. This is one of our planting sheets. We had many of these, and you can start to see how we use wide drifts of landscape, and a fairly diverse, this list is all perennials, a fairly diverse list of perennials to really make the medians and the planting areas year-round interest. Next. Then from vision to reality, these are some construction slides. Right here it looks like just a road construction job, really. We ended up putting in some slot drains. We put curbs in most of this area to really define the planting areas and help with drainage. This is one of the foundations for those towers. They were poured as round foundations, and it just gives you a feel for the construction work. Next. Then these towers were something that we really had to monitor. The red color was a real issue, and we wanted to see how that was going to look. So they put these towers together. These were manufactured in a shop in Lafayette, and they were painted in Indianapolis. They were shipped over to another shop to paint. And we went over there and looked at them as they were laid down like this, and we had the client there, and they were kind of shocked because they started to look pink. And the last thing they wanted were these pink towers out along the road. And we started, I started looking at it closely, and it was a very overcast day, and it was a very light sky. And what was happening is when this laying down, this is a glossy finish, and the white clouds were really reflecting off the top of these tubes. And it was making it look pink. It really was. But then what we decided to do, well, let's put one up as the way it's going to be out in the field. So we had them bring a crane out with some straps, and they yanked one of these things up, and sure enough, it darkened up, and then it became exactly what our intention was. So I think it shows that by really getting something out in the environment and putting it in a position that it will be installed, you can really convince a client to do something right. If they were just to see it laying down, they might not have even approved this paint scheme. But now we're hoping they're not going to be pink. Sometimes red fades, but we do know we have to be on a repainting schedule every 10 years or so on these things. Next is just a series of these photographs now of night shots and day shots. This starts to show how these things are lit at night. That was we took a very conscious effort to see how we can uplight these, and then this little light at top, how that glows, and then there these are little lit panels for the sponsor signs that start to really make that thing come alive at night. Next slide. And then during the day, the broad bands of color, we wanted to really use plant materials in large masses because, again, you're going down this corridor 45 or 50 miles an hour, and you have to use plants in mass. It has to really you can't do anything kind of small in these planting areas. And so you can start to see how that's a nice foreground for the towers. Next slide. And this shows a before and after of that eastern gateway. And again, before there was nothing here. It was all pavement, a rusting bridge. Now we have a raised median, painted bridge with some towers, and it really changed the whole look. of that entrance corridor. And this is really one of the most striking landscapes that people really remember, because the residents know what this used to be like. Next is this is the raised median with the heavy plantings, and these are custom banner poles to match our lighting. So you can see the rhythm of color as it goes through. And again, then the rhythm that we tried to establish with these towers, we knew we couldn't line the whole corridor with them because we didn't have enough room or enough money. So we had to group these things strategically to get the most benefit out of them, because each tower they're not inexpensive. So every one, we had to take advantage of every placement of the towers. So this, we're trying to show them in perspective as you go down the road. And next slide. It starts to really create an effective gateway. This would be halfway through the corridor. Next. So getting close to closing here, some of the issues I just want to cover. The corridor length is 2.5 miles. 19 of these 45-foot landmark pylons were developed. Sponsorship opportunities were brought in that really made for the long-term viability of the project. Without that, this would have been a hard sell to all the parties. The maintenance plan was an issue. HNTB helped to prepare a maintenance plan so we could show the town how much this was going to cost on an annual basis, and so we could show the other players so they could contract for it. Plantings, we had hundreds of trees, 4,300 bulbs, 11,000 perennials, 6,000 individual ornamental grasses to show the volume of the plant material that we brought in there. Again, the plant's tolerant to urban conditions. Landscape irrigation. We did bring irrigation into this right from the beginning. It's in this type of environment, if we didn't irrigate it, it would look pretty rough. And the image that they wanted was something of almost a commercial landscape, something that looks very green and very inviting. So obviously the landscape irrigation was part of that. The bridge, event graphics, we talked about that. The creative lighting. The enhanced safety, those raised medians actually help to enhance the safety on the corridor. And the aggressive project schedule we talked about was primarily for the inaugural Formula One race. And any of you who are race fans, you knew when that race came, that's a big deal. It's a real international event. And that's what really spurred on this whole push to get this project done. So the aggressive schedule was to meet the F1, and that was really a statewide concern, which caused this project really to get done so quick. Public-private partnerships were a big deal, as well as funding resources and a cohesive client group. So the last couple slides really just show a nighttime shot. Again, that this performs both in day and night, which was very important on this corridor because it's very dark out there if you've ever been out there at night. And it really, and in the end, we feel that this corridor really does provide a unique gateway for the community and reflects what's unique about the city, the town, and the state of Indiana. So that's it.
Thank you. It's great to be here. We are, as he explained, we're a two-office firm. We have an office in Indianapolis and an office here in Muncie, which is where I work. And we're about a 10-person office currently. The garden at Perrin Park, as he said, is an unbuilt work. It was a master plan, a vision plan that we developed. We were hired by the Southern Indiana Botanical Society, a group of volunteers, down in Jeffersonville, Indiana, who had this vision, an idea to build develop a botanical facility, a 7-acre botanical facility. They had leased some land. The park is Jeffersonville, if you're not familiar, is southern Indiana on the banks of the Ohio River, across the river from Louisville. So there's quite a market to draw from, even though Jeffersonville is such a small place. And Perrin Park sits just a few blocks off of the river. The Southern Indiana Botanical Society leased 7 acres of this 100-acre private fitness park, essentially. I think they have a 99-year lease to develop this botanical facility that they had envisioned. So we were hired in, I think it was 1998, to do the master plan for this. There's the garden site within the park. The site, Perrin Park, is essentially flat, no topographic relief, open, sits within a residential neighborhood in Jeffersonville. Very little context to draw on. So essentially, what we had to do was to build a landscape. That was our challenge. And we started by the process, the master planning process, by isolating the systems that would be layered to create this place, this new landscape. We did that in large part to educate the client about what it would take to create this park, this facility, and to really educate them about the systems, the infrastructural systems that create the form and shape of this place and the identity of this place, so that they could, in the future, be educated, make educated decisions about phasing, which is obviously something that they have to do based on the kind of funding that they have. So we started with the most basic layer, the organizational structure. Very simple, very classic, the north-south, east-west, north is up, north-south, east-west axes defining the order, the 4 points of the square, and several diagonals was the sort of the main bones of the park. And this is as an example of what we were trying to achieve there. This is an example. This is White River Gardens. This is a really interesting shot. It's a project that we worked down in Indianapolis. A winter shot from the mezzanine up in the conservatory, and it shows the really strong axis. And that's the kind of strength of an order we wanted and we envisioned for Perrin Park. Next was the circulation system. The primary pathways following that really strong ordering geometry, and then secondary pathways that take a more random, circuitous route through that geometry into the more private and intimate spaces. This is another of our projects, just as an illustration of circulation and the interest it can create. This is Minnetrista. This was a project that Rundell Ernstberger did quite a number of years ago. And then the series of landmarks which serve to mark the significant points in that order that we were trying to establish. We wanted to, just in terms of graphics, we wanted to describe enough of the park to just give the sense of the park, but we didn't want to nail ourselves down for future design development into a specific thing. I mean, we did in a couple of cases, but and this, in this particular instance, a landmark at Riverbend Park in Muncie, another project of Rundell Ernstberger, at marking that point at the bend in the river. And then topographic relief, that was really important because, again, we had this flat place, and we wanted enclosure, we wanted interest, we wanted some variation in the vertical plane. So we isolated that system, tried to describe what we were thinking in terms of the relief for this place. Really thinking of it in terms of sculpting the land. And in particular, creating a privacy on the edges, creating berms around the perimeter, and then using earth forms in the whimsy, or the children's garden, the upper right corner, using earth forms in a whimsical, sculptural way. So those are the two main areas where we were working with relief. This is an example, again from White River Gardens down in Indianapolis. This is the Sun Garden, and we were thinking of creating these kinds of berms. This is actually the levee along the White River that we planted up against. Creates a nice sense of enclosure, but that's the kind of effect we were thinking of for the perimeter around Heron Park. And then finally, the layer of plant materials. Well, in particular, the tree canopy, to provide that sense of enclosure and to really support everything else that we've been layering up to that point. The structure, the circulation, to try to describe how we wanted to use the tree canopy to create spaces and rooms. In the way that we did, this is Sunrise Garden down in Evansville, in the way that the tree canopy creates that sense of enclosure for this field of grasses. So the next step was putting it all together after we'd been through that exercise with the client, putting the images together, putting those systems together, and then starting to create a description. Again, there's that fine line between describing something and nailing something down. When you're working in a master plan, at the master plan level, you want to leave yourself open so that you can develop something in design development and construction drawings. But we wanted to give them enough of a sense of the place so that they could go out and raise money, so it would excite people, so that it would inspire people. And this is the main graphic that we use, an orthographic projection, to try to give the sense of the spaces and the quality of those spaces. With a number of different features, named features throughout the garden. One of the things that the client wanted was marketing materials. They needed our work to function as a marketing brochure for them. They needed to take our drawings and go out and try to raise money for the garden. So we named things as much as we could for the purpose of that these elements, these components, could be donated items that a particular donor could donate money to, or donate the money to provide for. One of the features that was fairly well developed was the 4 corner markers, an Eric Ernstberger vision as a way of marking the 4 corners of that structure, the garden, the main order of the garden. One of these markers would be at each of the points of that square, made out of different material. Each one would be made out of a different material. They would be sort of like vine trellises, maybe a stone piece, maybe a wood piece. But this kind of graphic is the kind of graphic that gets people excited about donating money, and that was a big incentive or purpose of this. One of the corner markers in place at one of the points on that square. And again, this really sort of evocative kind of graphic technique of the black and white with just a window into the reality of the color of and richness of that place, I think is really effective. We are currently working with, hopefully this will be a long-term relationship between Rundell Ernstberger and the Southern Indiana Botanical Society. We're assuming it is, but so we're working currently on phase 1 development package, working through design development of this piece of the whole plan, the building complex, which is the entryway. But we, as landscape architects, sited the building and sited it in a way that it would support the structure of the garden, that it would really reinforce what we were trying to do with the garden, which is usually not the way it works. It's usually given a building sited somewhere and you have to work around it. But this was nice that we could really integrate the building with the site. So there's a, I can't remember his name, Wayne, Estopanol. The Estopanol group is working on the design development plans for the building. And we're working on some of the exterior spaces, just as in this White River Garden shot, some terraces that are associated with the building. Just a development phase that they can get in place, have a building, have an administrative headquarters, have some parking, and really start to move forward on the rest of the plan. And just an enlarged view of that. You see the building is sited right on one of the main axes, and that main axis runs right through the building. And originally, in the master plan, we were thinking that axis through the building would be an open air space with a water feature, but as we were working through it in design development, that became an enclosed space. So and we struggled with the client on that because here we had locked them into this idea of this open air space, and it was hard for some of them to give that up, but it really made more sense to enclose it in the end. And probably the next step for them will be this perimeter berm garden, which is really essential to get in place and get planted so that it can really start to create the sense of enclosure and place. And an enlargement of that. Another technique that we used, I'm not sure which software we used for this, probably Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, to screen back the plan and highlight one of the garden areas. I think, again, is really effective. The product that we gave the client was a booklet. So these would be pages of the booklet. The children's garden, they're very anxious to start on the children's garden, and really haven't gotten very far in design development of that. But just imagine it as a real whimsical place. And as an example, this is the courtyard outside in the back of the Muncie Children's Museum, a play structure that Rundell Ernstberger designed, but whimsical in that way. And an enlargement. With earth forms, earth sculptures as the primary form in that garden space. This is an Eric Ernstberger sketch of that children's garden. ornamental, probably lots of ornamental grasses and little nooks and crannies and spaces. And then the client really wanted an Asian garden, so we had to incorporate that. And we located it on the northern terminus of one of the axes. An expanse of water, as in this is a Kentucky Fried Chicken headquarters down in Kentucky, I guess, that Rendell Ernstberger worked on quite a number of years ago, but that effect that we were envisioning for this Asian garden, an expanse of water and really emphasizing the horizontal plane. And this is a view down one of the axes to the terminus into this Asian garden. And then there are a number of specialty gardens which are located around the central circle gathering space. The color wheel garden, a horticulturalist's or maintenance person's nightmare probably to try to keep that in order, but an interesting concept. And a ledge rock garden, which is sort of the yin or yang of that central circle, the wooded part of that central circle. And then a woodland stream garden that runs along the western perimeter and empties out into the Asian garden. This is one of the specialty gardens down at the White River Gardens, the train garden. Again, something that the client asked us to include because somebody had donated the train and the tracks. So, but it turned out to be a fairly interesting place. Enlargement of those areas. This is the ledge rock garden. The idea was that we would try to express that southern Indiana quality of ledge rock, large slabs of limestone stacked, like the falls down at the river right in that area. And then the woodland stream garden, more of a quiet, intimate place. And then the idea of creating a walled garden, something like the garden that we restored, actually. This is the garden court down at the Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. But to create a number of different rooms where small displays could be, or change-out displays could be exhibited. And an enlargement of that with a water feature in the center. And walking along the edge of that between the central square and circle space and the walled garden. And then the gathering lawn, we have the ledge rock. It's very yin and yang kind of a form, but half in a wooded landscape and half as an open gathering space, which is really important for them, and possibly for rentals, for income for the park. And we were imagining something like what we had created at the White River Gardens, this in the wedding garden at the terminus of the White River Gardens, that openness with walkways around the perimeter and a wood trellis that serving as a gateway between the building and that gathering space. And then more functional space, the maintenance facility, which is something we're working on currently. Important to get that in place right away. Enlargement of that. Tucked away over in the corners, heavily screened. So, in closing, we hope that we've provided the client with some rich and varied images for them to be able to move forward and develop this park, this facility, and hope to work on this into the future. Thank you.